welcome to the inaugural edition of Counterpoints Friday. Ryan, actually, what people didn't get to see, although I did consider taping it, was the amount of effort it took to get an earpiece in your ear. It seems as though Ryan's ears are too smooth to hold the earpiece.
Yeah, we'll see if it holds on. We'll see if it holds on. If not, I won't be able to get my talking points from the control room.
That's right.
Just have to wing it on my own.
You need the voice of God in your head to direct you. Well, we're really excited to be here. We were talking to Crystal and Sagar on yesterday's show about what an honor it is to be here because we love and appreciate this audience and what you've helped them build here so much. So it's just very, very exciting to start the show today. How are you feeling, Ryan?
Feeling good. We get to talk about Trump some more.
Yes.
The big guy's still here.
He's still around.
Wait, the big guy's Biden. He's the former guy.
Right.
Trump's the former guy. Okay, sorry.
Right. Well, I think they probably...
meme nicknames straight.
Yeah. Well, I was going to say, I think probably both of them have been referred to as the big guy at one point or another.
Yeah.
But speaking of Donald Trump, he was in conversation with radio host Hugh Hewitt yesterday discussing a potential indictment. We want to play some sound of that because it's actually pretty big news in the context of a lot of different things that are going on. So let's take a listen.
You know the old saying, a prosecutor can indict a ham sandwich if they want to. I'm just asking, if there is such a prosecutor and they indict you, would that deter you from running for president again?
I don't think the people of the United States would stand for it. And as you know, if a thing like that happened, I would have no prohibition against running. You know that. You've already
I do. And that's what I want people to understand. That would not take you out of the arena.
It would not. But I think if it happened, I think you'd have problems in this country, the likes of which perhaps we've never seen before. I don't think the people of the United States would stand for it.
What kind of problems, Mr. President?
I think they'd have big problems. Big problems. I just don't think they'd stand for it. They will not sit still and stand for this ultimate of hoaxes.
So, Ryan, he's walking this fine line that Lindsey Graham got in a little trouble for attempting to walk. And I think actually unnecessarily so, because what they're saying is essentially what the left is saying, that the tensions, especially on the right, are so high, that there's such anger and frustration among the Republican base, and especially the sort of Trump slice of the Republican base, that an indictment of Donald Trump, I think we all know, could cause riots, I think is what Lindsey Graham said. And Donald Trump is trying to walk the fine line between saying, getting caught in this question of incitement. And I think that's why he stopped short of saying what those big problems might be, whether or not you...
Mostly peaceful big problems.
Mostly peaceful. But whether or not you like Donald Trump, I think that's fundamentally the left and the right are saying the same thing in this case, that even though the left wants to pin incitement on the right, it's true. This could be headed in a very, very dangerous direction.
You can also talk it in that direction as well. So
100%.
Imagine if Chuck Schumer went up and said, look, if you don't indict, name an officer and name a killing, whether it's Eric Garner, or Michael Brown, or George Floyd, if you don't indict and convict these officers, then there'll be big problems.
Right.
There are going to be big problems. And so you say, well, Senator Schumer, what kind of big problems? Oh, just big problems, the likes of which you have never seen. I don't think people on the right at that point would say, hey, it's true. There might be big problems, and Schumer's just a pundit out here stating facts. People would say Schumer is encouraging there to be a reaction, and he's threatening the prosecutor, he's threatening the jury that if you don't do this thing, that there's going to be blood in the streets or things are going to be burned down.
Right.
And I think we've got a similar thing going on here. And I think it's so fun to watch Hugh Hewitt try to guide interviews, and sometimes he guides them in the place that he wants it to go. Other times they veer off a little bit. Here, he even narrated what his own vision for the interview was. He said, I wanted people to understand that you're still going to run for president even if you get indicted. And then Trump goes on in a direction that Hewitt didn't want him to go, which saying there are going to be big problems. Not only am I going to run, there are going to be big problems, the likes of which you've never seen. And you can see him clarifying there. It's like, what do you mean by big problems? He's like, oh, okay. I made news, which he likes. He loves to make news. He's also like,
Well, yeah, I mean, then again, though, whether or not it's a threat to a prosecutor, I think is a very different question. And I don't think even the hypothetical you just laid out with Chuck Schumer, which is an interesting one, even that I don't think would necessarily amount to a threat so much as it amounts to a diagnosis of the problem, which is very real and obvious. I do think it's a fine line, though.
But what if you're essential to creating the problem?
But
So
how do we find
somebody-
that? How do you disentangle those variables?
Somebody goes by a small business. There's been a lot of crime on this block lately. I'm pretty good at solving crimes. Give me $500 a month, and I don't think you're going to have any problems. This is a really nice small business you've got here. It would be a real shame if something bad happened to it.
I certainly don't disagree with that. I do think, though, when it's public officials talking about, and we don't actually even need to get into that question because there's a lot more going on with this, but I do think it's going to be in the future because we have this is also news from this week, the January 6th committee is planning not only to go into September, which they had said earlier, they're also planning to go into October. They said, I think
Election
it was,
Eve.
Right. They said they...
Season finale, Election Eve.
Yes, they sunset on December 31st, so they can. Some people are saying whatever final report they issue wouldn't be until after the election, but we do know that they plan to. In fact, they're talking today about their schedule for the rest of the year. They're meeting today to talk about their schedule for the rest of the year. So this is going to be looming.
Season 2, you mean?
Season 2, right? Which we can't wait for. This is streaming soon. Unfortunately, not bingeable though, because
I
you
know
have to tune
somebody
in week
should
after week.
put the first season together so you can just binge it.
Like the books that they do, the Mueller report with like an intro by whom, just name it. Anyway, this is going to be looming over the rest of the election season on a sort of daily basis. It's part of an election strategy. There's no question about it because it eats into time that Republicans have to talk about gas prices, inflation, whatever they think is going to be politically expedient for them to talk about. Now, this is a shadow over every Republican candidate every single day, as to the extent that you can do the drip drip. And there's plenty actually dripping. You don't have to create a lot of it, although on the January 6th side, they surely are. Trump's Save America PAC. This is from Politico this week. Another
tear sheet
story.
up here,
We got another tear sheet here. Paid $3 million to cover top lawyers' legal work. Ryan, $3 million from the PAC. The legal work covers January 6th work and Mar-a-Lago work. How does this play into everything that is surrounding Trump going into November?
And what's shocking in that headline as it relates to Trump is the word paid. Trump does not pay lawyers. Like he's like the old HuffPost bloggers. He's going to pay you in a platform, and you got to
and shower you with comments.
you're going to get comments, and you get the platform here. So like, if you're a slip and fall lawyer from Philadelphia, you do a pro bono case, but the impeachment case. Remember that guy who like hadn't prepared anything and just gave a completely like off the cuff stem winder in front of the Senate. It was great advertisement for his slip and fall business back in Philadelphia. So for him to actually have his PAC pay $3 million to a law firm to get real lawyers to do real work suggests a heightened sense of concern about where this is heading for him, which I think is reflected also in his ramping up the threats or punditry or whatever you want to call it. Because once Lindsey Graham had gotten so much heat for saying, hey, there's going to be riots in the streets of America if this happens, everybody knows that if you go there, that's how it's going to be received. And so he went there deliberately knowing that's how it's going to be received. So I think those two things together suggest that he's getting kind of concerned about where this is heading. Like, now it's not going there anytime soon, it doesn't seem like, because the other news we have is they appointed a New York judge finally to look over these documents for really utterly absurd reasons. The Justice Department had asked to be able to continue to look at them and examine what was lost. They claim, if you take them at their word, they're claiming, which you're supposed to do when you're hearing out these arguments, they're claiming that there's such sensitive national security information that they had to raid the home of a president in order to retrieve this information, because there could be human intelligence sources at risk. And so now they're not allowed to sift through that. Now, they might be bluffing, and there might not be anybody at risk. That's a massive gamble for a judge to be taking, to say, you can't even look at this anymore. Like, imagine that there is something actually sensitive in there that is time sensitive that they need to deal with. Say, hey guy in Beijing, like, you might want to get out of there because your name was in here, and we saw in the video that this person we think is an asset was like roaming these hallways. To stop that mid-search, to me was just wild. And then to have this, special master going over the documents to determine what's executive privilege is just incoherent, because that's something that a judge or a Supreme Court has to determine whether it's executive privilege. Like, is there even executive privilege for somebody who's no longer in the executive if the current executive has like waived executive privilege, which they obviously have because they are suing, or they're prosecuting, they're trying to prosecute this case. And it goes back to this judge, which is just wild. Have you looked into this, Judge Cannon?
A little bit. I mean, all of this is pretty convoluted. And I think that's why actually Democrats realize that as an election strategy, if you're talking about this from a purely sort of nakedly political standpoint, you can say that's why this is, in a way, politically expedient, because it's such a vague question day in and day out, because unless you have time to peel back every single layer and to determine what the credibility of the DOJ and the FBI is at any given stop, and the credibility of Trump is at every given stop. Like, we have two basically less than credible actors on every side of this with every step of the way. And so it basically just becomes a dark cloud, and it plays into what one person can fundraise off of and what another person can fundraise off of. And as a media strategy for Democrats, it's really helpful, because to the extent that we can have these headlines about the special master, nobody knows what a special master is. You have to.
I mean, it's not exactly made up, but like.
Right. It's like.
Kind of.
Right. Right. And so it sounds really serious, and it is really serious, but you'd have to really, at every given step of the way, you have to be like diving into the minutia to determine who has the credibility at that particular step, because it's very, very difficult to trust the credibility of either party here. Although
on this Judge Cannon, it gets pretty easy. And her story also shows how much stuff goes on that even the most dogged like journalists are going to miss at the time. So she was confirmed. A handful of Democrats voted for her in November of 2020. So like after the election, but before Trump had left office, and about 6 weeks before Democrats took control of Congress. They've since released some of her. The answers that she gave to the Judiciary Committee going through her thing. One of the questions they ask is like, list. So this is a 38-year-old woman, not to be ageist here.
Whoa,
They say list 4, so she's had a decent career, like 10 plus years. She's been in the legal world. They say list 4 papers that you've written, because they like to read the papers, and their opponents are going to go through it and find things and challenge them in the hearing. Nothing.
I saw these.
She had like some press releases.
It was pretty fun.
In which she was mentioned from her like law firm. And then it was like it says like list speaking gigs, list lectures that you've given.
Media appearances. It was her wedding announcement.
It was her wedding announcement.
Yeah.
It was like list panels you've been on. Like everybody in Washington has been on a panel. She hasn't been on a single panel. And maybe this is just, populism made beautiful, like just plucking people off the street and throwing them on the bench. But this is also a job that requires, some experience. And they said, why did you join the Federalist Society? The answer, I wish I could quote it. It was just, I'm not a lawyer, but I was like, that doesn't even make any sense.
I'm not a lawyer, but
this is crazy.
Doesn't sound right.
This is crazy. Like, you don't seem to have any idea what you're doing. And so when her first legal opinion came out, and you had all these legal experts saying that it was an incoherent draft opinion, it's like I didn't quite believe. I thought they were being like partisan hacks or something. Then it's like, oh no, this is like what they actually mean is that this is a paper that somebody like a 1L would turn in and get it graded by the professor. I mean, like, not for political reasons. This is just wrong and bad. Like, turn this back in. Like, you misunderstand everything. And so now here we are with like a special master determining whether there's executive privilege at play. It's like, that's not how this works, but that's how power works. She's the judge for life, unless somebody figures something out.
Is that incitement?
It's incitement, I think, to impeachment for like being completely unqualified.
Well,
yeah.
We have one more tear sheet here that I think actually gets to your point, and this is about Mark Meadows, the ex-chief of staff in the White House under President Trump, former President Trump, who is now complying with a January 6th subpoena. He had sued in the past not to comply, but Ryan, to your point about bringing this a little bit full circle, you started by saying the reality of Donald Trump paying the lawyers and to the tune of $3 million, which probably doesn't cover all of the work. I don't know. That seems, if anything, low. But
it's more than he's paid for a long time, I'm sure.
So this does, I think, speak to what the point that you're making, which is that there seems to be a sense from the outside and from the scraps that we're getting in the media that they're taking this more seriously. That Mark Meadows is complying with the subpoena. That seems to be a sign that things are probably intensifying.
Yeah, and I have always felt that if the system wants to try to check future attempted coups, future presidents from going to, okay, hey, you went to every court, you got lost in 30 plus court cases, fine, you sue all you want, like that's our system. You went to the Supreme Court didn't want to hear it, fine. Like those are the process we have set up. Once that's over, and you're continuing to try to overturn the results of the election, coming up with harebrained schemes, like we're going to get fake electors, and we're going to have Mike Pence say that, well, there's these fake electors, so therefore we need to send it back to the states, and on and on. Once you go to that place, like that to me is attempting to overturn the election. And if you want to check that, I think it's not just the president that you have to check. You have to check the chief of staff, because without chiefs of staff, without these senior figures engaging in these operations, a president is stuck. Like he can rant and rave all he wants, but if all the people around him are like, the Supreme Court has spoken, and the vice president's not doing your thing, it's over.
That's been one of the most interesting, I think, sagas to follow. Well, it was throughout the entire Trump White House, right? And there are a lot of Trump people who are still very frustrated with how difficult it was to get anything done in the administration, especially the kind of hardcore Trump people in the administration, because they felt like they were being blocked every step of the way by establishment Republicans who had infiltrated the administration. Now, Mark Meadows would not be called an establishment Republican. This guy he's a Freedom Caucus guy. That said, I do think what was happening behind closed doors at the White House, and we've seen some snippets from people who have, given their testimonies, whether being coerced or not at this point, saying that there was a lot of resistance within the White House to continuing to push on the election. There was a lot of resistance, I think, probably on the campaign side at some point too. But Mark Meadows obviously is an interesting part of that puzzle. I do still think at the end of the day what Donald Trump wanted to do, he fires people to get that stuff done, right? We've seen it. If somebody gets in his way, Rex Tillerson gets in his way.
Who was the the like anti-environmental lawyer that he had running the Department of Justice or something?
Right.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I don't know how much of a bulwark, even in this hypothetical, Mark Meadows could have been.
Right. What's your sense of what his posture was? Was he trying to slow walk, or was he like to the barricades?
I don't know. It's hard to say. It's very hard to say. So it's because again, that's kind of a difficult question when you're thinking of like, what does one thing constitute? Like, are you on the Sidney Powell side, or are you on, the Ted Cruz side or the Josh Hawley side? Now, neither side is one that I agreed with, but it's night and day between Sidney Powell and, voting against certifying the electors, which people did in 2016, Democrats did in 2016, and had predated the Trump era, certainly on a bipartisan basis. So it's sort of night and day, and it's hard to peg down without being like there and on a fly on the wall back in January of 2021 to know where people stood. It's hard to say because those positions are slightly different.
You have to tune in for season 2 of the J6 hearings.
That's right.
Cable news is ripping us apart, dividing the country, making it impossible to function as a society, and making it impossible to know just what is true and what is false. But the good news is they are failing and they know it.
That is why we're building something new, a new mainstream, a healthier one, something more trustworthy, something that we are going to need in one of the most pivotal times in American history. We are building up here for the midterms, for the upcoming presidential election, but we need your help. So if you can help us out by becoming a premium member today at breakingpoints.com, we're trying to change America for the better and the entire world.
So what are you waiting for, guys? Go to breakingpoints.com and sign up and help us build a new mainstream.